So today, lads, we're going to be talking about Becky Hammon, who seems to be losing her damn mind. So, we saw today the Fever absolutely demolished the Aces. An Aces team that is below 500. And still, to this day, we have yet to see. Whether or not the Indiana Fever we've yet to see whether or not they can beat a team above 500. They have not beaten a team above 500 the game that counted without Caitlin Clark. But I'm going to talk as well about the Dallas Wings game. I watched as much of it as I could after the game. I watched as much of it as I could, and it is genuinely the WNBA is a young players league.
Becky Hammon has officially lost it, and the entire WNBA is watching. After a humiliating 30-point loss to the Indiana Fever, the Las Vegas Aces head coach didn't hold back. She didn't sugarcoat, she didn't play politics, she detonated. In front of media cameras, Hammon tore into her own players, calling their effort trash, their focus non-existent, and their professionalism completely gone. This wasn't just frustration, it was a full-on emotional eruption from a coach who's used to winning and suddenly finds herself surrounded by a team, crumbling under pressure. The Aces were once the gold standard of the WNBA, a championship squad with swagger, chemistry, and a deep bench. But now, they're a mess. Blown out by a mid-tier team missing their star player and exposed on both ends of the floor. Hammon's fury might seem shocking, but to those who've watched the Aces stumble week after week, it felt inevitable. What we saw wasn't just anger, it was the sound of a dynasty cracking. But here's the question that really matters. Now, was Becky Hammon trying to wake up her players, or was this the moment she finally gave up on them? The answer could change everything for the Aces.
And Becky Hammon, this is the craziest tweet I've seen. Becky Hammon and the Aces. There is a complete lack of professionalism and a complete lack of focus. I don't know how you step on a court with 20,000 people in the stands and perform like that. That's crazy. They're shooting layups. I thought they were grabbing and holding us. It's a rugby match and my team doesn't want to play rugby back. They get their ass kicked.
No one expected the Indiana Fever, still clawing their way up the standings and missing Caitlin Clark, to absolutely dismantle the defending champion Las Vegas Aces. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't a close game. It wasn't a hard-fought battle. It was a collapse. The Aces didn't just lose, they were embarrassed on a national stage, and Becky Hammon had a front-row seat to watch her team fold in real time. The Fever came out swinging, and the Aces looked like they had no idea how to respond. The energy was off from the first whistle. Indiana's young core, including lesser-known names and even a third-round rookie, ran circles around the Aces' veteran lineup. There was no urgency, no fight, and absolutely no resistance. By the time the game reached the third quarter, the damage was done, and the Aces looked like they had checked out completely. For Becky Hammon, this wasn't just another bad night at the office. It was a boiling point. A team with championship DNA doesn't get run off the floor by a rebuilding squad missing its best player. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The Aces couldn't string together stops. They couldn't finish at the rim, and worst of all, they looked like they didn't care. The optics were brutal. A 30-point blowout against a team that, on paper, should have been an easy win. It's the kind of loss that makes headlines, not because of who won, but because of how shocking the margin was. And for a coach like Hammon, who built her reputation on accountability and toughness, this performance was a slap in the face. It wasn't just that they lost, it's who they lost to, how they lost, and what it revealed. A lack of chemistry, a lack of hustle, a lack of pride. The Fever didn't just expose weaknesses in the Aces' game plan, they tore open a deeper issue. This team might not have the heart to defend their title. And as the final buzzer sounded, one thing was clear: this loss wasn't going to be swept under the rug. Becky Hammon wasn't going to let it slide. Something snapped that night, and the fallout was about to begin.
If I knew which one was coming, I could prepare myself better. Tonight, we put a third quarter together, and after that 3 quarters of trash, the offense was trash, the defense was trash. And we had one person score more than 2 field goals, and that was AJ Wilson. They just wanted more than us. I agree. I stand by that.
After the game, Becky Hammon stepped up to the microphone and unleashed a storm. There were no cliches, no excuses, no fake smiles or hollow motivational quotes. Instead, she delivered a brutally honest assessment that left jaws on the floor. In just a few minutes, she torched her team with one of the most scathing post-game rants we've ever seen from a WNBA coach. She didn't dance around the issue. There was a complete lack of professionalism, a complete lack of focus. She snapped. Hammon didn't just criticize the effort, she shredded it. She described her team's play as trash on both ends of the court, saying they had 3/4 of trash with only one decent stretch in the third. That kind of public condemnation is rare in professional sports, especially from a coach with championship rings. But Hammon had clearly reached her limit. She compared the physicality of the game to a rugby match, then accused her players of not being willing to fight back. That wasn't just about defense or rebounding, that was about heart, mental toughness, pride. And to hear Hammon say it, her players didn't show any of it. In front of a sold-out arena, they folded, and she wasn't going to protect them. From the backlash, what made her comments even more shocking was how pointed they were. She didn't hide behind, "we need to do better" language. She directly called out the lack of leadership, focus, and desire. Only A'ja Wilson was spared from the verbal firestorm. The rest of the roster, fair game. Hammon made it clear that the team's problems weren't tactical, they were emotional and cultural. Coaches don't usually go nuclear like this unless something deeper is wrong. Maybe it was the accumulation of weeks of underperforming. Maybe it was frustration from players tuning her out. Or maybe it was an intentional move-a-last-ditch effort to jolt her team back to life by shocking them into accountability. But one thing was undeniable. Becky Hammon wasn't just angry, she was disappointed. And in coaching, disappointment hits harder than rage. When a coach stops believing in her players, the season is no longer about adjustments. It becomes a slow unraveling, and that unraveling may have just started on live TV. When a coach like Becky Hammon speaks publicly with that much venom, you can be sure the locker room behind the scenes is even more tense. What we saw on the court and in the post-game press conference was just the surface. Inside, something's broken, and it's been breaking for a while. Her frustration wasn't random. It was aimed directly at players she no longer believes are giving enough. And the message was loud and clear. Some of them might not belong on a championship roster. Anymore, it starts with names that fans have been side-eyeing for weeks. Kier Stokes and Kia Smith are now drawing attention not for what they contribute, but for what they don't. Their presence in the rotation has raised questions about depth, skill, and even effort. Becky didn't name names, but the implications were impossible to miss. Players who don't bring intensity, who don't compete on every possession, are dragging this team down. And in her eyes, that's unacceptable. Then there's Jackie Young and Chelsea Gray, two veterans, expected to lead, but whose performances lately have been anything but inspiring. Gray's mobility has become a major concern. Becky bluntly said, "She can only work so hard because she can't move." That's not criticism of strategy. That's a shot at conditioning, at availability, and perhaps even commitment. Jackie Young, normally a spark plug, has gone missing in big moments. The fire just isn't there. And it doesn't stop with the veterans. Becky's comments suggest a complete disconnect between what she expects and what she's getting. A'ja Wilson is the only player consistently praised, which only sharpens the contrast between her and the rest of the roster. Everyone else is skating on thin ice. This kind of tension doesn't stay quiet for long. The energy in that locker room right now is probably radioactive. Trust has likely eroded. Players are either silently fuming at being called out or quietly agreeing and losing confidence in their teammates. Neither is good. Becky Hammon didn't just criticize effort, she questioned character, and once a coach starts doubting the heart of her players, it's no longer just about basketball. It's about belief, and when belief is gone, the team chemistry dissolves with it. Not long ago, the Las Vegas Aces were the blueprint for how to build a WNBA powerhouse. They had the stars, they had the depth, and they had Becky Hammon, one of the most respected coaching minds in basketball. But now, that same blueprint is falling apart piece by piece. The question is, no longer can the Aces repeat, It's how did this team fall so far, so fast? It didn't happen overnight. The signs have been there for weeks. Sloppy losses to underperforming teams, inconsistent energy, veteran players looking worn down, and behind the curtain, a coach growing more and more frustrated. Hammon's recent explosion didn't come out of nowhere. It was a pressure release after weeks of watching her team slowly unravel. Injuries have played a role. Chelsea Gray hasn't looked fully healthy. The rotation has been unpredictable. But that doesn't explain the complete lack of identity this team now shows. Where once they played with intensity, now they look passive. Where once they imposed their will, now they react late. It's not just poor execution, it's poor motivation. And that starts at the top. Some believe Hammon may have miscalculated. Her reputation for toughness and no-nonsense leadership worked perfectly with a veteran team chasing a title. But now that the energy has shifted, her style might be clashing with players who are burned out or tuning out. When motivation turns into public shaming, players stop responding. That's exactly what seems to be happening now. This isn't just about stats or X's and O's. This is emotional collapse. This is a team that doesn't trust its system, its rhythm, or maybe even each other. Hammon's coaching brilliance hasn't suddenly disappeared, but her ability to reach this particular group might have. And that disconnect is showing up on the scoreboard. The Aces didn't just stumble into a bad stretch, they've lost their identity. The champions, who once bullied the league, now look like they're being bullied, and unless something drastic changes, their fall from grace could get a lot worse. Hammon's meltdown wasn't just frustration, it was a signal. The old Aces are gone. What comes next depends on whether this group can rediscover who they are, or if they were never that team to begin with. When a coach goes scorched earth in public, players usually respond in one of two ways. They either rally behind her message or retreat into silence. And for the Las Vegas Aces, it's starting to look a lot like the latter. No fiery social media posts, no public apologies, no team-wide show of unity. Just silence, and that silence speaks volumes. Body language has become the loudest voice in the room. During timeouts, players look checked out. On the bench, heads are down, shoulders are slouched, and eye contact with the coaching staff is practically non-existent. In moments when veteran leadership should be loud and vocal, the Aces look more like strangers than teammates. It's not just a losing streak, it's a visible fracture. Take Jackie Young, for example. Once a spark plug on both ends of the floor, she's now disappearing in big moments. And not just statistically, her presence, her swagger, it's all fading. Then there's Chelsea Gray, still battling injuries, but her effort and energy are noticeably dialed down. She's not the floor general who once demanded respect every time she brought the ball up. If there's frustration behind the scenes, it's clearly leaking into the game. Even players who used to be vocal motivators have gone quiet. No one's stepping up to counter Hammon's criticism or publicly owning the team's shortcomings. That could be a sign of a team agreeing with the coach or a team tuning her out entirely. And with Becky only praising Aja Wilson, it's hard to ignore the message being sent. The rest of you aren't pulling your weight, but the real question is, are the players now firing back in their own way? Maybe not with words, but with effort, with disengagement, with subtle resistance, a passive rebellion, where players show just enough to avoid outright benching, but never enough to fix the damage. In the WNBA, where emotions run high and egos matter, that kind of silent protest can tank a season. Becky Hammon may have shouted first, but the players might be answering in whispers. And if that's the case, it's no longer just a coaching issue, it's a full-blown disconnect between the person drawing up the plays and the ones refusing to run them with heart. The Las Vegas Aces aren't just dealing with a rough patch, they're facing an identity crisis. Becky Hammon's explosive comments have cracked the foundation of a team that once seemed unshakable. And now, the question hanging over everything is simple. Can this group survive the fallout, or has the damage already gone too far? From the outside, the talent is still there. Aja Wilson is putting up MVP-level performances night after night. Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray, and Kelsey Plum are all proven scorers. On paper, this team should still be feared. But games aren't. Played on paper, and what we're seeing on the court is a team that no longer believes in itself and each other. The timing couldn't be worse. The playoff race is tightening, and the Aces are hovering just above .500. That's dangerous territory in a league where momentum means everything. A few more losses, and they're staring down the possibility of a low seed or worse, missing the playoffs entirely. For a team that dominated the league not long ago, that's almost unthinkable. But the real challenge isn't winning games. Repairing trust. Hammon's rant may have been intended to light a fire, but if her players feel attacked instead of inspired, the opposite could happen. A locker room divided doesn't win championships. It doesn't even win games. And right now, this team feels divided in every way. To survive, someone has to step up, not just on the scoreboard, but behind the scenes. Maybe it's A'ja Wilson, the team's undeniable leader. Maybe it's one of the veterans who stayed silent for too long. But without a rallying voice to pull this group back together, they're on a slow slide toward irrelevance. The road ahead is brutal. Tough matchups, playoff implications, and all eyes watching to see if the Aces implode or overcome. But the truth is, talent alone won't save them. Chemistry, belief, and unitize are the things that turn slumps into comebacks. Right now, those things are missing, and until they return, the Las Vegas Aces will keep drifting. The question isn't whether they can bounce back, it's whether they still want to. Becky Hammon isn't just coaching a struggling basketball team right now, is standing at the edge of a cliff. Her recent emotional outburst wasn't just a reaction to a single bad game. It was a culmination of weeks of frustration, mounting losses, locker room tension, and a team that no longer resembles the championship juggernaut she once led. And in that moment, when she tore into her players for being unprofessional, unfocused, and flat-out trash, the conversation shifted from the players' performance to the coaches unraveling. The fallout is bigger than one game. Becky Hammon's entire image was built on being the poised, forward-thinking leader who commanded respect from day one. When she transitioned from an NBA assistant role to head coach of the Las Vegas Aces, she became one of the most talked-about hires in league history, and she delivered instantly, bringing home a WNBA championship and restoring the franchise's status as a powerhouse. But success is a fragile thing in sports. One season, you're the standard. The next, you're the problem. This season, the Aces are under .500, stumbling through games with visible disconnection and inconsistency. The body language is bad. The defensive effort is worse. And Hammon's fire, which once inspired greatness, now feels like desperation. Her players look more disconnected than ever. It's a question no coach ever wants floating around, but right now, it's unavoidable. When a team stops responding, when performances decline while public criticisms escalate, it's often the coach who ends up shouldering the blame. Hammon may have tried to light a fire under her team, but if the response is indifference or quiet resentment, she's no longer leading, she's lecturing, and that's a dangerous dynamic. Complicating matters even more is Hammon's history with the league. Her controversial suspension earlier this year for violating league rules already put a dent in her reputation. While many brushed it off as a blip on an otherwise stellar resume, it now looks more like the start of a troubling pattern, one where her decision-making, both publicly and privately, is beginning to raise serious questions. The front office isn't blind to any of this. They see the dip in performance. They see the players going silent, and they hear the growing noise. From media and fans alike, who are questioning whether Becky's methods once celebrated are now outdated or even damaging, the clock is ticking. If the Aces continue to slide, the organization will have to make a tough decision. Double down on their high-profile coach or hit the reset button before things spiral further, but here's the twist: Hammon still has immense value. Despite the drama, despite the downturn, she remains one of the most respected basketball minds in the game. If the Aces part ways with her, another franchise would likely snatch her up immediately. The question is no longer is she good enough. It's is her style still working? Because in the modern WNBA, where player empowerment and locker room harmony are critical, old school fire and fury don't always get results. So what happens now? If Hammon can pull her team back together and turn the season around, this will go down as the wake-up call that saved the Aces. But if things continue to unravel, her era in Las Vegas could end sooner than anyone expected. One way or another, Becky Hammon's legacy is being rewritten in real time. And whether she walks away with redemption or regrets entirely up to what happens next. The unthinkable is now starting to feel possible. Becky Hammon walking away from the Las Vegas Aces, whether it's her choice or the front office's decision, the idea that the architect of a WNBA championship could part ways with the franchise just a year later is no longer fantasy. It's a looming reality. Her fiery press conference, the team's implosion, and the obvious disconnect with her players have all become warning signs that this marriage might be heading for a messy divorce. A coach of Hammon's caliber walking away mid-season would be silent. It would send a signal to the rest of the league that even the best aren't immune to burnout or internal collapse. And make no mistake, if Becky were to step down or be quietly removed, would be about more than just wins and losses. It would be about the erosion of trust, the weight of expectation, and the limits of even the most brilliant basketball minds when communication breaks. Down coaches don't usually leave championship rosters unless something has gone seriously wrong. And that's the core of the problem. This is no longer a championship roster in spirit, even if the names on the jerseys suggest otherwise. If Hammon walks, it won't just be about the losing streak. It will be a statement that something inside the Aces culture has soured beyond repair, something that can't be fixed with a timeout or a lineup adjustment. There's also the question of what comes after. If Becky does leave, where does she go next? She won't be out of work for long. Her reputation, while taking a hit, still carries weight across both the WNBA and NBA. She could return to the NBA as an assistant or even land another head coaching gig in the W. But whatever door she walks through next, the conversation will follow her. Her departure from Las Vegas will raise uncomfortable questions about how she manages conflict, motivates players, and sustains success. And what about the Aces? If they lose Becky, they lose more than a coach. They lose the person who set the tone for their title run, who redefined their locker room culture, who transformed them from contenders into champions. Replacing her won't be as simple as hiring the next hot name. The ripple effects would hit the entire organization, from front office to fan base. It would also put a spotlight on the players. If a high-profile coach is shown the door or chooses to leave, the microscope immediately shifts to those who were supposed to carry her vision on the court. Do they step up? Do they take ownership? Or do they continue to drift without direction? A Becky Hammon exit would also send a message to the rest of the league. Even the top-tier franchises are vulnerable. It would embolden rising teams like the Fever and the Liberty, who are hungry to claim the crown that once sat so confidently on the Aces' head. It would create a leadership vacuum in Las Vegas and in the WNBA's coaching elite. And yet, there's another side to this. Maybe Becky isn't walking away at all. Maybe her eruption wasn't a sign of defeat, but a challenge, a final warning shot to her players. Change now, or this entire thing collapses. Maybe she still believes this team can salvage the season, and she's trying to shake them awake the only way she knows how, with brutal honesty. But if that's the case, time is running out. The playoff picture is tightening. Chemistry is thinning, and respect, once lost, is hard to rebuild. If the players respond, this chapter becomes a turning point in a comeback story. If they don't, Becky Hammon could go down, not as the coach who walked away, but the coach who stayed too long. Either way, the storm is here. Whether she grabs the wheel or jumps ship will define her legacy and the Aces' future. Becky Hammon's public outburst wasn't just a bad night, it was a full-blown alarm bell ringing across the WNBA. In just a few minutes, at the podium, she tore down the image of a united championship-caliber team and exposed the raw truth. The Las Vegas Aces are unraveling. And whether that unraveling ends in redemption or total collapse depends on what happens next. For weeks, the signs were their sloppy play, inconsistent energy, and a team that looked less like defending champs, and more like a group going through the motions. But Hammon's explosive rant made it official. There's a deep disconnect between the coach and her players. She called out effort, professionalism, and pride. She spared no one but A'ja Wilson. And in doing so, she sparked one of the most important conversations of the season. What happens now is critical. Either this was the wake-up call the Aces needed, or it was the moment the team finally broke. The players' silence speaks volumes. The locker room energy, the body language on the bench, And the absence of accountability suggests that trust may already be fractured. And when trust disappears, talent alone isn't enough to save a season. For Hammon, the stakes couldn't be higher. Her legacy as a coach, her standing in the league, and her future with the Aces all hang in the balance. This isn't about X's and O's anymore, it's about leadership, belief, and emotional control. If she can steer this team back on course, it will be her greatest coaching achievement yet. But if not, the very culture she helped build could come crashing down with her still inside. The Las Vegas Aces are no longer the WNBA's untouchable force. They're vulnerable, exposed, and on the edge of something irreversible. And while Hammon's words lit the fire, only time will tell if they spark a comeback core, a complete collapse. One thing's for sure, this isn't just about basketball anymore. It's about identity, respect, and the fight to hold everything together when it's threatening to fall apart. This is the reckoning, and everyone's watching.